मन के मंदिर हो, आंखों में बसते हो, होठों पे हंसते हो, हर पल जताते हो। तेरा मैं, तेरा मैं, तेरा मैं। प्यार के सागर हो, ज्ञान के मंदिर हो, आंखों में बसते हो, होठों पे हंसते हो, हर पल जताते हो। तेरा मैं, तेरा मैं, तेरा मैं, तेरा मैं, तेरा मैं। दुनिया में आए हो, रोशनी लाए हो, सबके दुलारे हो, हर दिल पे छाए हो, हर पल जताते हो। तेरा मैं, तेरा मैं, तेरा मैं, तेरा।
Happy birthday, Ajay, Milind, Raja.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yes, happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank
Ajay.
you.
All of them are here. Very happy returns.
Have a
All three are
wonderful
here.
episode.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh,
cute.
so
Oh,
precious.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's the best wish.
Yes.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Moving on, for the July session, we already know, but then this is where Anjali decided that we'll go with one book, which James got 45% votes, whereas Demon and March got second position with around 25%. So we'll be reading James. This is The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, reimagined.
Mhm.
So this is what the book will be reading.
Yeah, it's a book that's proving very popular, difficult to get from libraries. So that tells me it's widely read.
Okay, now we'll start the session. Ajay has chosen a very interesting topic of women in prison in different conditions.
Mhm.
So this is a curtain raiser.
I spend my time here inside these prison walls, lost friends to death, some go home, watch years pass, people come and go, while I do life without parole. I am a prisoner for the wrong I've done. I'm doing time here. This is not my home. Dream of freedom, hope for mercy. Will I see my family or die alone?
Lovely song. Good choice, as always, Srinivas. So we move on to the overview of today's theme, and Ajay has picked three excellent books, which is why all three understandably are in play. I just finished reading Stars Between the Sun and the Moon, and I've also acquired Dancing for Stalin, which I'm looking forward to. So as he said, there's culture, there's love, intellectual passion. And let me have him give us the overview for the rest of it, along with a summary of the three books. So Ajay, please go ahead as the reader of the month.
Thank you, Milind. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, these three are pretty fascinating books, I thought. And as I mentioned in the brief that I sent across previously, all these books I was inspired by trying to, when I was listening to a women's International Women's Day broadcast by Kylie Moore Gilbert, and I was inspired to talk about the theme for this month, which is the females political prisoners in captivity, especially in oppressive regimes. The theme is different, difficult, diverse, and at times even very depressing. The books are similar, yet each is different in its own unique way. Some similarities are obvious. All three books are true stories of female protagonists fighting for survival while being stuck as prisoners in very oppressive regimes. In some ways, the similarities end there. The differences are several, though. There are three different regimes: Iran, North Korea, and the erstwhile Soviet Union. The influence of the state in all these places is absolute, but the motivations for exerting those influences are quite different. So again, it's oppressive regimes, but oppression for a different reason altogether. Accordingly, what was unique was that each of these women had to use different coping mechanisms so that they can cope in that environment. So I think if you read at least two of the books, you'll see the difference. And if you read all three books, you'll see the difference absolutely. But the coping mechanism, passion seems to be a factor. Passion for the country and language in the case of Kylie, because she loved Iran and Islamic culture, and she even knew Parsi and languages. Passion for the art form in the case of Anna, because of her ballerina things and the passion she had for that art. And lastly, passion as a mother to stay alive for a child, being the case for Lucia in the case of North Korea. So,
Ajay, if you stop for a second,
Yeah.
Srinivas, the slides are not moving. Yeah. Okay.
No, I thought that he's giving introduction, so I didn't move to the first slide.
Yeah,
Okay.
the introduction is also similar to this, but you can absolutely move to the next slide actually after this. So with that preamble, I wanted to give you a quick perspective on each of the books. I've also tried to give a short line for each book in terms of what implications these books and the experiences of the author or the protagonist might have for current day society. Hopefully we can have a debate on that at the end of the session too. So let me start with book one, which is Christina Ezrahi's book, which is Dancing for Stalin. And I think the order we've chosen, I think we can go to the next slide, Yanks. The order we have chosen for these books is pretty much chronological. So you have the Stalin era first, followed by the North Korean book, followed by the most recent story of Iran.
Mhm.
So the story about Nina Anisimova is being famous as the first female choreographer in Soviet Russia. And it was Christina's research, the author's research, that has revealed Nina's true story. Of course, you'll find that as when the review comes as to how that true story came about. But Nina's art, which is her dancing, is a salvation, giving her a reason to survive and fight for her life. So she's used that as the survival coping mechanism. And art is a powerful tool during the existentialism crisis. And Nina survives that by dancing for her captors. So she uses her art to make sure that the captors had a reason for keeping her alive. And what sets this book apart from the other two biographies is that it has to say a lot about Stalinist Russia and its history, and more broadly about the role of artists in an authoritarian regime. There's a great deal of valuable historical information aspect. So the important aspect to reflect upon in this current, from this book is the current trend towards anti-intellectualism, or more accurately towards fake news, and how anti-truth is being propagated by each of those regimes. Even today, in most of these, even advanced Western countries, that's what's happening. So in the case of Russia per se, the Pussy Riot is the group that was punished by Putin recently. So that's a similar kind of fate that's that they are experiencing as what Nina experienced during Stalin's time. So Dancing for Stalin is a remarkable story of suffering and injustice, and resilience and love. So I'm sure Anjali would have a lot to say about that. Next slide, please, Yanks. Then we come across the second book, the Susan McClellan's book about Between the Stars and the Stars Between the Sun and the Moon. And this tells us the story of Lucia Lang, a refugee from North Korea. The appeal of this memoir comes in large part from its simple humanity. I think this is the essence on family, and family provides protection and support, but also demands sacrifices and places particular demands on young women seeking independence in Korea, South Korea, North Korea. But Lucia's family suffers indignities because of the infamous Songbun system. I don't know if any of you know of it or heard of it. I've researched it only after reading the book. And it's that that regime is really something quite, it's a total file on everything that's happened, not just with you, but in previous generations. So what your grandparents did lives with you for the rest of your life. So that is the kind of social classification that exists even today in North Korea. It came about in 1957, I think, about the time when many of us was beginning to come into this world. And the associations that was set up, and that system still continues. So these associations pass from generation to generation, influence not only things like party membership, but also job placement, education, marriage prospects, and ultimately to the access to food itself. And because of the fact that Lucia Lang was from a family that didn't have the access to the privileged classes, so her food was also deprived. So as the title of the book suggests, this is an escape possibly for dreamers capable of imagining a different life for themselves and their children. So that's exactly what Lucia does. It's incredible when you go through the review there about how much how much she does to live for her children. So reading these stories again gives us the sense of loss and liberation, should inspire all of us to work not only on behalf of the refugees, which is just the tip of the larger iceberg, but for those who are trapped behind the wall as well. So trying to understand how many today in North Korean society are suffering from the same kind of situation, plus the other things as well. The next slide, which is the last book, which is The Uncaged Sky, which is the most current of the three books, which is Kylie Moore Gilbert was just released from captivity in 2022, I think. So it's just over 2 years ago that she's come out of captivity. So Kylie Moore Gilbert, as I said earlier on, I was listening to her, and I've been listening to quite a bit about her. In fact, I've followed her on Twitter, and my only claim to fame is that I made a post on her thing which she liked, so which is great. So I tried to get to try to send her a message to see if we can convince her to speak to us, but she didn't even look at it. But that's a different matter. So she was arrested in Tehran airport on her way back to Australia after having attended a conference in Iran. And she's, as we said previously, she's she loves that culture. She's spent a lot of years there, but this time around, she's been accused of a spy, and it's probably because her husband was an Israeli citizen and was sentenced to 10 years by one of the most notorious judges who still exists in Iran. The book is a story of survival. Mo Gilbert attempts to make the best of a situation she has unwittingly been thrust into, using her intellect and social connections. So this is a totally different coping technique where her intellect and language skills and makes her survive in this solitary confinement. Even then, she tries to find people, friendships, and she makes the acquaintance of two fellow political prisoners, Nilofer and Sepideh, and at the cost of trying to go against the orders of the guards by standing on toilets to speak through ventilators to these people. So it's a very, very interesting way of communication, but basically her social skills come up in this book. And those are the techniques that she uses to cope with. Apart from the fact that she uses language, so because she uses Farsi as a language of coping. So in the book, Kylie shines as an academic, and her knowledge to learn is insatiable, and she seeks out intellectual conversations. She collects all the pencils in the jail to write notes and keep notes of what is happening and recording those experiences. So in fact, you'll find some in the book, if you go through it, there are some cartoons that she's drawn as well that may have made it to the press. So she's really documented her prison sentence because of her capacity as an academic to do that. So the final takeaway from this book would be that we have to voice and advocate for those who do not have a voice for themselves, which is what Kylie is doing right now. I shared a link recently on the main group. I don't know how many of you saw that, but that is basically Kylie speaking to an audience in the UN about the support she's got for refugees. So finally, I think the three coping mechanisms, which is culture, love, and intellectual passions, are what the three women use to get out of their confinements. And I was very keen to get a very gendered perspective on this. So I tried my hardest to get all three female reviewers for the book. Vinita and Anjali, of course, are there, but I know Sandeep has got a softer side to him, so we'll probably see how he is going to talk about it as well. So let's see what our reviewers have got to say. So over to them now, via Milind, I guess. So.
Great. Thank you so much, Ajay. A very nice, elaborate overview. And from what I finished reading today, so much to take away from reading any one of these three powerful stories. So great start. And now Sandeep will reflect initially on Dancing for Stalin by Christina Ezrahi, writing the story of Nina Anisimova. Christina was born in Munich, but interestingly, she lives in Tel Aviv, and she also is a trained classical dancer. So with that, Sandeep, it's all yours. Go ahead.
Thank you, Milind.
Mhm.
And thank you, Ajay, for the roundup. Born into an elite family in 1909, Nina Anisimova entered the Kirov, high priest of Russian ballet, in 1928 after training at the prestigious Petrograd Choreographic Institute. For 30 years, until she stopped performing on stage, Nina charmed thousands as a character dancer. From then until 1974, she choreographed for Kirov and died a hero in 1979. But 4 decades after her death, we now know of the darkest phase of Nina's life, thanks to a file that mistakenly landed in the hands of Dr. Christina Ezrahi, a historian of Soviet cultural politics. Arrested in February 1938 by NKVD during the Great Terror, of spying, Nina was convicted and transported thousands of miles away in a cattle wagon in horrible conditions to serve a 5-year sentence in Karlag, Kazakhstan's sprawling gulag. Doomed to perish at temperatures 43 degrees C below zero, Nina fought back with courage and hope. Faced with minimal food, bare clothing, and inadequate shelter, Nina joined a group that danced for the administrators of Karlag, thereby earning better living conditions and maintaining sanity. In circumstances where most families disowned their convicted members, Nina's husband, Kostia, doggedly pleaded her case with NKVD. After a prolonged struggle, Nina was shifted back to Leningrad, and on 11th November 1939, 21 months after her arrest, finally released from prison with her case closed. On 23rd December 1939, Nina went back to perform on the stage at Kirov. The book is exceptional in many ways. It's a broad biography of Nina, her incarceration during Stalin's Great Terror, the fascinating world of Russian ballet, and the lens to which the Soviets went to protect its arts as a key cultural asset during the World War II to preserve their soft power and cultural superiority. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sandeep. That was a very succinct, complete summary and reflection. That was very rewarding. So, good start to the reflection phase. And we next move to Anjali's reflection on stars between the sun and the moon. And this is Lucia Zhang's story from North Korea, narrated by her and translated by Susan McClelland. So go ahead, Anjali.
Thanks, Milind. The book Between the Sun and the Moon by Lucia Zhang and Susan McClelland on one woman's life in North Korea, An Escape to Freedom, was a gripping but challenging read. I must confess that I read all 3 books, but I liked this one the best. The book was gripping because the narrative poignantly shared the bewilderment of the hungry and suppressed child that grew up in the oppressive regime of North Korea. Challenging because it was difficult to comprehend how any country could deliberately see its citizens starve. It was a learning for me that given enough control, it's easy for those in power to brainwash its people through schooling, media, and brutal punishment. This realization hit home sharply almost at the end of the book, when Lucia describes how she returns home to find her parents living in poverty and squalor, while the painting of the supreme leader hangs on the wall in pristine condition. Having read the books on the Iranian prison experience, numerous stories of the concentration camps during the Holocaust, and the narratives of slaves fleeing to freedom, what struck me was that the whole of North Korea, the entire country, with its all-seeing, all-pervasive controls, which Ajay referred to, came across like a concentration camp or a prison. The most frightening part was that in other narratives of imprisonment, the oppressed and imprisoned had memories and dreams of freedom. But in North Korea, the power of the cult was such that there was unquestioning obedience and acceptance of the system.
Mm-hmm.
Lucia's story brought to light how the North Korean system is cruel, all-pervasive, and inescapable. how desperation, starvation, and repression force its people to flee and choose smuggling, prostitution, and slavery in China as a better alternative to the hunger and grinding poverty they live in. The constant description of hunger led me to think of all the news reports of impending starvation in Gaza. How can humans allow such things? The strength that motherhood brings with it runs as a theme. Lucia's mother is unable to do much except hand over her own meager rations to her children, which she does without complaint. Lucia as a child cannot escape the fact that her parents are not part of the system. While her parents are unable to rebel, motherhood forces Lucia to look for alternatives to keep hunger at bay. Eventually, she sets out to find work and living across the river in China. However, the work is nothing but grim human trafficking, and Lucia becomes an undocumented worker, grateful for a kind word and food, a form of slavery. Lucia seems to have hidden reserves of strength, learning how to navigate living in China, ingratiating herself with the family there, and quickly learning the ropes of the prison system when she is finally caught. Her brother seems to lack these smarts. The father, too, while a good man, was imbued with the patriarchal culture and didn't stand up for his wife and children. Ajay wondered whether this showed the strength of the female gender. I am not so sure. I agree that Lucia is strong and resourceful, learning how to immigrate to Canada and make a new life. I also wondered why Lucia was not content to stay in South Korea. Ajay and I thought it may be because of its proximity to the north. The demilitarized zone is so ubiquitous and right next to the airport. Maybe Lucia needed the distance. The book is very informative, touching, and extremely well written, even though a translator was required to obtain Lucia's story. It reminded me that we should never take the freedom we enjoy for granted.
Thank you, Anjali. I read this book and it's at once, like you said, extremely well written, but also very saddening to read about what this lady had to go through during her time in North Korea. So thank you for that very nice reflection.
Very nice.
And with that, we go to the final reflection from Vinita on The Uncaged Sky by Kylie Moore Gilbert, a British-Australian journalist who was incarcerated in Iran. A talk by her on a Women's Day forum, as Ajay said, in March, inspired him to choose this powerful theme for today's session. So with that, Vinita, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. The Uncaged Sky is a compelling memoir of Kylie Moore Gilbert's grueling experience of living in Iranian prisons for 2 years. Kylie Moore Gilbert, a British-Australian academic, was arrested in 2018 at Tehran airport on her way back to Australia after attending a conference for which she was an invitee by Iran's feared Islamic Revolutionary Guards. She was convicted for charges of espionage in a shadowy trial presided over by Iran's most notorious judge, Abol's Qasim Salavati. Dr. Moore Gilbert was sentenced to 10 years in prison on charges of espionage, and this is an excerpt from the book, Espionage, Conspiring Against National Security, Acting to Destabilize the Regime, Collaboration with Hostile Enemy Countries. Based on her incarceration in Tehran's Evin and Qadchak prisons for 804 days, the book is a gripping account of a harrowing ordeal. Actually, she was in 2 prisons in Tehran. So, I mean, she talks about both of them, though she talks more about Evin than Qadchak, where she was there for a shorter time. She was kept in solitary confinement in a filthy cell of size 2 by 2 meters for months. She describes it as worse than physical torture. She says it eats you away from the inside and you go crazy inside your own head. You become your own worst enemy. Actually, one of the problems which most prisoners, I guess, but more so women face is psychological problems. So, in addition, she was subjected to relentless interrogation. Interrogators switch day to day, hour to hour, from hypocritical to threatening, from flirtatious, excuse me, to curtly dismissive. At one point, Moore Gilbert's captors want her to entice her then husband, Israeli dual national Ruslan Hudorov, to Iranian territory. It says then husband because after she is released from prison, she realizes that he was having an affair with her own, I think, supervisor, and then they divorced. So when that was refused, they demand she submit to being filmed for short propaganda films denouncing the West. Kylie was pushed to the limits of her endurance by extreme physical and psychological deprivation. Kylie's only lifeline was the friendships she made with other prisoners inside the Revolutionary Guards detention center called Du Aleph 2A inside a prison called Evin. They communicated through the air vents. This is something which Ajay has already mentioned, between cells and by hiding secret letters in Hawa Khori, the narrow outdoor balcony where she was led blindfolded for a solitary hour each day. Kylie, Nilofer, Bayani, and Sepideh Kashan developed a sisterhood which ultimately helped them cope with the prison torment. This book is dedicated to them. Cut off from the outside world, Kylie realized she alone had the power to change the dynamics of her incarceration. To survive, she began to fight back, adopting a strategy of resistance with her captors. Multiple hunger strikes, letters smuggled to the media, coordinated protests with other prisoners, and a daring escape attempt led to her transfer to the isolated desert prison, Warcha, to live among convicted criminals. On November 25th, 2020, after more than 2 years of struggle, Kylie was finally released in a high-stakes, three-nation prisoner swap deal orchestrated by the Australian government, laying bare the complex game of global politics in which she had become a valuable pawn. It was ultimately an Australian envoy, Nick Warner, who secured her release in a prison swap for Iranians held in Thailand. Right. Thank you.
That was wonderful, Vinita.
Thank you.
I'm struck by what a long arc Ajay has chosen for this theme, starting in the 1930s and going right up to 2022. That's the reflection we just heard from Vinita. So thank you all for those reflections. And with that, we can move on to an open discussion on the theme and on any of the three books that you'd like to talk about.
Milind and Yanks, if I may take your permission to steal the screen for 2 minutes, is that possible?
Yeah, sure, please.
Yanks, can I do a screen share? Yanks, could I do a screen share, please?
Yeah, just a sec. I think I didn't realize I'm on mute. 1 minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can do it.
Thank you.
Play us some music, Ajay? Wow.
You have to share sound, Ajay.
Oh, you're not getting the sound?
No.
No.
Oh,
There's a share sound on the.
okay. So, sorry. Let me see. Where did I have to do that?
By the way, now I'm experiencing what Milind and the East Coast people go through, which is
Yeah, okay.
11 p.m. session. 11
you-
p.m. is not easy, man. I don't know.
You hear it now? Can you hear
Yes.
the
Yeah.
sound?
Yes, Ajay.
Yes.
Thank you for allowing me
Wow.
that. The reason I wanted to share that is this is, oops, sorry, oops.
We can hear you perfectly, Ajay. You're doing great.
Yeah, go ahead.
Ajay, you're on mute.
You're on
Yeah,
mute.
Sorry,
Yeah.
because the video went on to the next one. I thought I was feeding that onto you as well. I guess not. So the reason I wanted to share that particular piece of music is that is the music created by a Kachurian, but it was actually Nina's Anisinoma and her husband who choreographed the ballet to that while they were in prison.
Oh.
They worked on it, and that's the music, that's the thing that's come out of the creation of Nina. So I thought it was brilliant. That's what's setting the mood for how creative these women were in terms of their skills and survival techniques.
Yeah, that was beautiful. Thank you, Ajay.
That's called Saber Dance, by the way, that
Mhm.
that particular piece of music.
Mhm.
Back to you, Milan, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So whoever wants to start the open discussion, please go ahead.
I find Rama is there, and Rama, having lived in Moscow for so long and taken us for a show, I'd like him to talk about the Russian ballet and how important they consider it to their cultural heritage. If Rama is listening.
Yeah, I'll just switch on my camera. 1 minute.
Also, if
You see me?
anybody knows anything
I'm
more
glad
about
at 11:42 p.m., Rama, you're kind of like alive. Good.
You bet. I don't get to go to sleep till 1.
I'm like, man, God bless you guys.
It's like the ever-ready bunny and Energizer batteries, you know, you just keep pumping. And then with a saber dance, of course, you're going to be alive, you know. My preference is something like Shostakovich's Waltz, but with a saber dance, you gotta chop off heads. Sorry, that's not true to tune for Ajay's books. No, I think, Chacha, to respond to your point, I think I'm not surprised that they pulled her back. because she was such a famous ballerina. Having said that, what has surprised me is that she was not sucked into the Politburo's, sexual trafficking cell in this processes. But what has even surprised me even more is that she returned to St. Petersburg at one of the worst time periods. 2 years after that, they had the famous, siege of St. Petersburg, where people became cannibals in order to survive. And that's where Putin's mother was being carted off as a corpse. But Putin's father, who had also been uh, smacked by or nearly killed by Stalin, had come back on leave from the front, which is a brutal front, saw life in her, pulled out his pistol and told the ambulance or that corpse or funeral truck driver that he would shoot him. And that's how his mother survived, and that's how Putin was born. So it is amazing of her resilience, not just during the incarceration that she went, but also the fact that she was a survivor of the siege in St. Petersburg. And I think fundamentally, it just shows that it's not culture that protects a woman from being brutalized. It's her individual strength and resilience in the face of awful odds that makes a difference. And that I saw as being the theme in all the three books, though I did have the privilege of reading all of them.
I agree with what you said, Rama, but just a quick thought that I think she was able to get certain concessions because of her skill and dancing prowess.
No,
Which,
that's what I meant earlier on, that because
yeah.
she was a ballerina, she got out of her incarceration. If she had not been a ballerina, like she'd been like any of those other two ladies, then the story would have been different. It goes back to what Chacha said, because ballerinas were put on such a huge pedestal that they stayed away. And the same thing happened even to Shostakovich, who mirrored her story. And Shostakovich was also nearly jailed by Stalin. And then he was retrieved and sent to the front at St. Petersburg. And then he said, okay, now you build a symphony. So that's how the Seventh Symphony came into being. But this was a story that repeated itself through anybody who was a top-notch artist. Incarceration by the NKVD, and then release, and then do something for the glorious motherland. So otherwise,
Yeah,
couldn't
even
agree
in
with you
that
more.
context, though, Nina had to actually start dancing in prison camps to make sure that her art is not forgotten, because otherwise, very few women
Yeah.
survived in those concentration camps. So,
Actually, it's a little more than that. It's unfortunately, I've not read the book, but I've got it down on my Audible to read it, to listen to it. But if you start thinking through, what rations they got and how difficult. I have it with me on my book, in my Audible, Milind.
Okay.
But if you start, so it's not that I'm not familiar with the book. It's just the challenges of the punishing routine that ballet has, and to be a top-notch ballet dancers with the kind of nutritional requirements and the nutrition she got, that is what amazed me, that she could still dance. But thank you for that.
Very nice.
But
comment,
what I'm surprised, Rama, is that despite her being sentenced, she was able to get parcels from her husband, the letters she could exchange with them. So I'm not very sure whether they were really serious about the punishment. Somehow they were,
I think
it was a leaky system, to put it like that.
I don't know whether it's leaky or not. You may be right. I'd rather go with Millen's perspective that because she was a ballerina and ballerinas were on a pedestal, she was able to get some special treatment because of it. One of my friends in Russia, who still is a very close friend, he's a Russian Jew, and his mother and father were, and his grandfather was a doctor to Stalin. And, proximity could protect, but proximity could also allow you to get additional favors. But the proximity itself was a double-edged sword. It could also cut off your head. And what amazed me about this lady, the ballerina, is that her skills allowed her to protect her. But luckily, she didn't fall in the foul books of somebody who would be ready to chop off her head. And obviously, that suggests that there was somebody looking out for her somewhere in higher than the NKVD apparatus, because Stalin's Beria was well known for that.
Yeah, Anjali.
Anjali, go ahead.
That's why I think that the North Korea book, amongst all the three of them, is so, in a way, frightening. See, that the system of repression and the fact that proximity to power, which Rama is talking about, was there in North Korea as well. But here the lady Lucia was on the other side of the system. She was not proximate to the power at all. And she still managed to dream, and she still managed to survive. In the Iranian prison, the lady again had access to the Australian embassy, and she had Farsi. She made friends with the jailers. She was also in a position or in some sort of a special way. I think that's why the North Korean book reached out to me, because, you know, we keep talking about the marginalized, the people at the bottom of the pyramid, the people who are suffering so much. When you don't have any proximity to power, when you don't have any concessions that are being provided to you, then how do you even dream of anything? Is actually what I found very challenging in the book. Very depressing and also very challenging. It gives you a sort of an insight into a different mind, which I don't really usually have, I don't have access to.
Yeah, and I think what you put very nicely, Anjali, was that the entire country was like a prison, so to say.
Right.
Also, when you read Lucia's story, it is not just her story. What's concerning is hundreds of women like her went through life exactly like she did, and some of them didn't survive. So
yeah, it's really, North Korea is really repression, extreme repression done at scale. Yeah, unlike other countries where it's maybe sporadic, but here it's done at scale. There was a PBS documentary on really North Korean. They followed a North Korean family across North Korea to their escape to South Korea and China. It's called Beyond Utopia. Kind of pretty good.
I think I've seen that movie.
Yeah.
Srinivas,
book been
you
made
want to say something? Srinivas, your hand is raised.
Yeah. See, my question is to Anjali. That you talked about that system. I forget the name, but the system of filing the family details. So, is there an escape? I mean, that if you are born to that type of a family, is there a escape out of it, or is it like a permanent you carry forward?
The book I haven't researched this, Yangs, but the book seems to indicate that there's no escape. And I think Ajay has researched it. Ajay may have a further, some further insights.
I have researched it, and I'll place a link in this chat of a write-up by the UN HCR guy about the Shogun system. It's very interesting. That's where I got my knowledge from. So
it says, I just did the wiki check. It says that it's like a caste system.
yes, that's what it is. It is a caste
Is it
system.
only in North Korea, or is it also
Only North
South
Korea?
Korea?
Only
North
North Korea.
So
That's what
this is
it
the
says.
link. If you can look at it, you'll see the write-up, which gives such a deep insight into that Shogun system.
Even a caste system, like we use the caste in a very loose way in this forum, but we understood what the caste it means in US and what it means in India. Now you're talking about a different system. So, but in India and US, I think that they are sort of negotiable to some extent.
Ours is a Varna system. Ours is a Varna
Okay,
system.
no, okay. I think we're not getting into nuances, but the bigger point, Chacha, is, I mean, these are slightly negotiable over a time. So is the Korean system is negotiable, or is it temporary right now because of the dictatorial regime?
Not according to what Wikipedia says.
Yeah.
Not negotiable. You're
Not in
stuck with
Korean
it.
society. It's not in Korean society, is it? Not in South Korea. Is it only in North Korea? It's very, very country specific and regime specific.
No, but Sharad, tomorrow that for whatever reason, this guy Kim Jong or whoever that guy is, if he gets deposed and they get a democracy, this one will go.
That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, it should
Highly
go.
unlikely.
It should.
Highly
Why?
unlikely.
What is there to sustain it? I mean, it's only the regime
His sister is there. His
Next in line.
children are there. This guy went to schooling in Geneva. This guy.
Yeah.
So it's not that he didn't have an exposure to Western. When I was in Geneva, I'd heard about him studying in the international school, same school where Indira Gandhi went to. So it's not like the guy is not aware of all these areas. But for building on what Yang's point was, there's a very nice K-pop, K-drama that Grace, my daughter, we watched, which basically sketches out, it's really beautifully done, of a very rich South Korean business magnate's daughter who goes paragliding and lands in North Korea. And though it is obviously a little fictionalized, it sketches out a little bit of what you're describing in a way, and how proximity allows you to survive. So it is not just the caste system that is unbearable. It is basically the fact that there is a moneyed elite that gets the best of the world, and the rest are thrust in abject poverty, and they're forced to live that way. And it's secondly, from my understanding, is South Korea has also got a caste system which parallels what is in North Korea. That doesn't change, and that's also equally grave and gripping.
Driven by birth or driven by these books?
Birth.
It's a very different thing from these books and acts that have been performed recently, or whatever the grandparents. I don't know the system, but it sounded as if it was some record of their dissidence, record of their criminality. I don't know. What is it that puts a person in the bad books quite literally?
Yeah, if I can interject, what happens is that the Koreans are in many ways, a very closed society. Of course, it's opening and, different, one shouldn't generalize. But generally, if you marry outside the Korean system, you are ostracized by the Koreans. It's like what we used to call a half caste or, like a mixed breed. So there's a sort of a cultural looking down upon somebody who has married somebody who's not a Korean, and it can be very difficult for women who marry outside the community. I suppose even for men, but I've only heard the women's stories. So to that extent, there is some sort of a ethnicity and a pride in the ethnicity which the Koreans have. But how much that is changing because of their movements and this and that. The Korean professors that we have at Harvard Business School, for example, are also very Korean. The people, the staff members, they live in America, they have American passports, they marry, they sort of manage that thing, but then they have a very strong Korean identity, which you just scratch the surface and you find it.
Another thing that I found quite striking about these three books is, like the Korea story has a woman who comes out of a very poor family and is deprived in many ways. You have a ballerina in the Russia story, and you have a very accomplished journalist in the Iran story, but in repressive regimes, they all suffer. It doesn't matter how qualified you are, how good you are in your own profession, you suffer nevertheless. And that's...
Anu, raise your hand, Milind.
Yeah. Anu, go ahead.
I was just wondering, just from the point of view of such a large portion of the population being so oppressed, what is to prevent it to becoming like the French Revolution, for example? Such oppression like we were reading in North Korea. Why aren't they rising up?
because they have no
ability
means
to
to do that.
organize, I would say.
Yeah.
The repression is so all pervasive that it would be impossible for somebody to coordinate and organize a sufficient number of people.
And I would say their secret service is ruthless. You read about that one of the senior generals was thrown into a place and was basically ripped apart by dogs done by the dictator. So once you see events like that, you need to have real guts to feel that.
But Rama, you've seen the similar things happening in Russia in a slightly different way. But
no.
But
In
not
Russia,
like
it
North
was
Korea.
not like North Korea. In Russia, they were killing people, but they'd either ask them to jump off the 4th floor window or they'll be shot in a jail. This sort of savagery is very atypical, I would suggest. The
no,
ruthlessness
savagery
is not.
is Rama. I think sorry to again, but in see the Asians, Japanese and Koreans and Chinese, they're known to have a savagery at times. So it is there in DNA. It is not something unusual. So given in that context, yes, oppression is oppression, and Stalinist things are happening there. So you think that in the future they do get thrown out at some point of time? Now today looks impossible, but maybe.
Not
But
me.
the suppression is
I
also of
wouldn't, but-
information. You know, the North Korean people, they're totally cut off to the external world. Completely cut off. There is no internet, nothing. So
Raja, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, and I guess, to a large extent, thank you. Now, to a large extent, I think they use citizens against each other as well. And that's their method of trying to, keep everyone suppressed, right? I mean, it's very effective, especially if ratting on somebody else allows them to get some favors, right? So I think that's life, in that country. But I wanted to share talking about detention in Iran, I wanted to share the personal experience and the trauma that I had an extremely close friend of my daughter's, in California, Neha's friend, a guy by the name of Cyrus Wafadari. His dad and his stepmom were both detained in Iran. They're Iranian Americans. They owned an art gallery in Iran, and he is of Zoroastrian origin, and apparently there's discrimination against Zoroastrians in Iran. And in fact, there's a move to take over all of their property. And of course, the fact that he owned an art gallery was seen as, displaying some indecent art and so on. So there were a lot of accusations that were made. They were detained, for several years, and they were sentenced to multiple years in prison, all hyped up. There were charges of espionage against them, and they were sentenced to, lashes, solitary confinement and everything else. So, I mean, this friend of my daughter's, was desperately trying to raise any kind of support. Eventually, they were released very recently, but I don't think they're going to get any of their property back. And of course, they lost quite a few years in prison, so it's pretty sad, what happens. And the charges are all drummed up, right? Nothing, it's basically what, once they decide to put you in, doesn't matter, what the reality is.
If I can just add one more point about Tehran, it's a very funny regime, but if you're American of any sort, any shade, you just shouldn't go there. I went there when I was an Indian, and we turned around one corner close to where the hotels were. Even when I was at the hotel, the waiters were obviously from their Secret Service. But I turned around the corner and found a complete Sadajis living there. And these guys were kids, they were playing happily, and I spoke to that guy there. And maybe it's the Indo-Iranian cultural links. They're living there like anybody else. They're obviously restricted. But I think anybody who has the visceral hatred for America is so strong that I'm not surprised, Baraja, by what you said. Really, it's a sad state, because otherwise I think Iranians are just wonderful people. But
Srinivas, go ahead.
Yeah, slightly changing the topic. I think Ajay chose a topic of women in prison. So now I was just thinking that is it today's world, is it different for a man in prison vis-a-vis women in prison? So we have
Yes,
half a dozen ladies here. So I think maybe they can give the perspective.
oh, yes, it is definitely different. Number one, of course, because of the, requirements of men and women, they have to be different. At least they should be different. Many cases, they don't have that. They don't even care about that. I mean, the requirements of women. So there is a difference. And as I was saying earlier, that mostly I think women in prison, they face far more psychological problems than men do. And also many times women, because of being mothers, they have a different kind of, issue. I mean, one of the things that came up is that they try to survive because of their children. So the whole question of survival also, how they cope, their coping mechanism, etc., is also largely linked with their gender. I mean, this is just some of the things that I could say.
And also in the Iranian book,
I think they both have their.
Yeah.
Yes, Pushpita.
Yeah, go ahead. Pushpita, go ahead.
Sorry, because even the men in prison are not, there's violence, there is a lot more of gangs being formed, which is much less in a woman's prison. Sexual abuse, all of that is as strong in men. I don't know if any one of them is easier to cope with than the other.
We can't hear what you're saying.
I think your voice is getting cut off.
She's making a very valid contrast between the conditions. I mean, that she's saying that men is much more violent place and much more gangism, and whereas women tend to bond a bit more. I think that's what I understood from what Pushpita is saying. So the challenges, like what Vinita is saying about their requirements and their emotional deprivation vis-a-vis the physical aspect of what men face. Thanks.
That's right. Yeah.
Ajay is saying something.
Yeah, 2 points I wanted to make. One point was that specific to the book, in Iranian prisons, the women spend time in jail on behalf of their husbands. So they serve this, the jail terms, at least according to the book. Vinita, you can correct me if I'm wrong there, but according to the book, the women are imprisoned on behalf of their men, because the men are the people who commit the crime, and women serve the sentence. So that's ridiculous, the way it goes.
Yeah.
The
North Korea has a similar system. 3 generations are punished if a person does any mistake.
3 generations living or 3 generations in the future?
I think it's like your DNA, Abdul. It's like your DNA. It stays with you, according to that article I've just shared. It's a DNA. It stays. It's just like anything else. I mean, you are the pota of somebody, or a grandson, or a great grandson, or so and so who committed this crime. So this crime goes with you. That's how it is.
But let me ask you a question. Even in non-repressive regimes, do women face more problems in prison? Meaning, if you take a country like even India, is it, if a woman is arrested, are they subjected to much greater abuse than men are? Men get beaten up, but I'm not sure whether there is a sufficiently detailed accounts available about the status of female prisoners, even in countries like India, or for that matter, US.
Can we quantify, actually, is my question, because the nature of the, problems will be pretty different. How do we quantify it?
Also, I don't know whether this is the case in most countries. Are prisons for women separate from prisons for men in all the countries?
Yep.
Required to be.
Required to be, as far as I know.
Yeah, they have to be.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely. There's no way you can.
I think Ishan raised a hand for a while.
Yeah, Ishan, go ahead.
No, I was just wondering, our exposure to North Korea, does anybody have a, I mean, see, South Korea has fair amount of exposure, even Iran, even Russia. North Korea is a blank. I can't think of any North Korea.
No. Don't say it's a blank. They've been sending tons of students to study in India to do computer science all over the place. So if one country has a fairly good idea, India will be amongst them.
Yeah, because someone told me we have an embassy there. You know, that's what I'm trying to figure out.
But they've been sending tons of students. And in fact, I won't be surprised if all the hackers that we are having hacking have learned their skills in the computer science departments of India. So they've got a pretty huge contingent coming on a regular basis. And as you can remember, the reason why Pakistan has its missiles is it's North Korean rocket science, which has been sent across. So it's a bunch of very smart people there. We shouldn't assume because of the poverty and the dictatorship that the level of intellect, it takes brains to do all the crypto hacking that they've been doing. It takes brains to do all their kind of like computer cyber war that they've been waging with almost every country to get things done.
Or the
So
missiles.
yeah, the missiles, that's what I said about. And imagine Russia is now going to buy missiles from North Korea, you know. So yeah, it's a smart country is all I was going to propose.
But it's interesting that in North Korea, the repression has been going on for decades. One person on to the son, on to the grandson.
But Milind, we are looking at repression because of our yardstick. Over there, if you've been brainwashed, when you're brainwashed, you just assume that that is the right way things are. And then that's why I said this K-drama is very cool, that these guys then come across to South Korea and they show how the North Koreans look at South Korea and all the stuff at South Korea. So it's a very fascinating, and it's done by the South Koreans, but it's a very fascinating drama. The fundamental is that if you've been brainwashed, you just think that's the way life is.
Yeah, but then Lucia's story indicates that there may be many women or even men who want to escape that kind of repression. It's not like they want to live in it, right?
No, true. All I'm pointing out is not that it isn't there. I'm only suggesting the vast majority are so brainwashed. Then there are some who understand it. And there are stories of men also who have escaped. In Reader's Digest, I read about it ages back. So there are enough men also who do that. But it's still few and far between. It is not like when the Berlin Wall was coming down, there was this mass movement against it, which the East Germans realized they could not stop it without carnage. That's the difference I'm trying to make over here.
Yeah, and also the way to avoid repression in these regimes is to be subservient to what in the Korean case was called the party, right? So if you are loyal to the party and if you are willing to align yourself with whatever they want you to do, then you don't suffer in that repressive regime, right? Yeah, Anjali?
But remember that book we read by the Dalit? So that is a repressive regime and there's brainwashing. And this gentleman, his father was brainwashed, but he, in the book, saw something beyond that. So what is it that creates that spark that enables somebody to look beyond the brainwashing and dream of something better? All these North Koreans who are coming to India to study, how come they go back and are continuing to be brainwashed and working for the regime? How come they don't see anything beyond it? That is actually the question, because even our independence came because some people went to the UK, they understood the liberty, they were able to question, Ambedkar questioned. There were some people who were able to see beyond the repressive regime, see out of the box. But how is it that so many North Koreans, if they're actually coming to India to study, as Rama says, how come they are not seeing anything beyond that? How come, why don't they stay behind here? Why do they want to go back?
I think
Is it
Anjali, it's a
that-
very valid.
They always have a minder. They always have a minder.
Somebody holding a gun to somebody's head.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To their relatives are threatened that if you don't come back,
I think the family is at risk.
Yeah.
If they do
I-
anything
That's
else.
a
Or they have obligations, or they've signed something with they will catch them at some stage in their life.
Mhm.
Now, I remember during our IT days, when people used to go to the US and they had no scholarship, or even if they had scholarship, they used to go to the US embassy to apply for a visa. I know one of the guys, one of the seniors, came back with his visa rejected, and he was one of the richest fellows in that batch, because they had some film theaters and all that. And the US embassy rejected his visa by saying that, oh, the wealth you have here is nothing. It won't, you'll make more in a year there than you have here. So we are not convinced you're going to come back to India. So we are not going to grant you visa. So that kind of evaluation took place in the US. So maybe in North Korea, before they leave the country, they evaluate whether there is some strings that pull him back to North Korea. They've got those families or the parents or children or whatever it is, and they just have to go back, apart from any other natural loyalties they might have. So
Or they put the mother in jail. No?
yeah, exactly.
And say until you come back, your mother will not be released. And there's
Yeah.
subtle ways the state can apply that same pressure.
Mhm.
Not
recently
just
there was
in North Korea. Sorry.
We've seen that stories even in Sri Lankan refugees. We've had those stories come out in the press where people are, the families are threatened, so the Sri Lankan refugees had to go back to Sri Lanka, kind of situation.
Anjali's got a valid point. I mean, North Koreans seem to go back. Iranians don't. We have a huge diaspora of Iranians around the world, including the United States, including Dubai. But we don't have this diaspora of North Koreans wishing to leave the country, set themselves up after they've acquired the education. It is very different. I think it's a very valid point.
That's
So there
what
is some form of control
together.
being exercised.
Yeah.
Somewhere there is coercion that prevents them from leaving and just getting out.
Yeah, it's like what we used to call bonded labor. They have a
Right.
way of bonding them so that they cannot escape. Another thing that I thought in the context of Dalits that Anjali mentioned, the entire government or the regime does not have to be dictatorial or repressive. But within society, because of the social system, certain communities will face repression, right? Even in democracies. And that's what the book on caste by Isabel Wilkerson showed about the race system in the US. That there is repression felt, though we don't consider the regimes in India or in the US as repressive regimes. So social systems or tradition can cause repression too.
Can be prisons by themselves.
Sorry?
I said they can be prisons by themselves.
Yeah.
recently there was a case of an American soldier defecting to North Korea from South Korea.
Yeah.
One observation.
Actually, I'm planning to go to the DMC next month.
You are going where? Sorry, Abdul?
I'm going to the DMC, the demilitarized, the
DMZ.
So Abdul, just remember, Trump crossed the line, but you don't cross the line.
We want you back, Abdul. We want you back.
Yeah.
You don't actually go to the DMZ.
We don't want your book, Abdul.
Yeah, you
We want
technically go.
But it's
Technically,
very
you do
close
go
to
there.
Seoul.
It's
Abdul,
right
just
there.
make sure-
It's on the line.
Abdul, make
Yeah,
sure
you go on the
those
line.
balloons-
I've been there myself, but you go on the line. But the DMZ is the line between the two lines, isn't it?
Abdul, just make sure none of those balloons land on your head.
That's even more important.
The balloons with garbage.
Yeah.
God knows what it contains.
Yeah.
We hope it has got only garbage, right, Suresh?
Never know.